What kind of neighborhood fines you for swimming in your own lake? The sun was setting over Lake Serenity, casting a golden glow across the water that lapped gently at the edge of my property. I stood there, barefoot on the grassy shore, my toes sinking into the cool earth, staring at the letter in my hand. The HOA's logo glared back at me, bold and unapologetic, a $500 fine for unauthorized use of a restricted water body. My lake, my home, my sanctuary. The audacity of it burned hotter than the fading summer light. I'd bought this lakefront property 2 years ago, a quiet escape from the city's chaos, a place where I could breathe. The lake was why I chose this place, its stillness, its promise of freedom. And now, the Harmony Oaks Homeowners Association was telling me I couldn't even dip my toes in it without their permission. I crumpled the letter, my pulse racing, and tossed it into the grass. This wasn't just about $500. This was about control, about them thinking they could own me, own my land, own my lake. I wasn't going to let it slide. Not today, not ever. My name is Clara Evans, and I've never been one to back down from a fight. Growing up in a small town, I learned early that you don't let people push you around. Not bullies, not bosses, and certainly not a self-righteous HOA board with too much time on their hands. I moved to Harmony Oaks for peace, not bureaucracy, but peace doesn't come from staying quiet. It comes from standing your ground. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, the lake shimmering outside my window, and started digging. The HOA's bylaws were a labyrinth of rules, each one more absurd than the last. No one approved fences. No one approved paint colors. No one approved anything, apparently. But there, buried in the fine print, was something they'd overlooked, the property lines. My land extended 10 feet into the lake, a detail the HOA seemed to have forgotten when they slapped their fine on me. And if they could fine me for using my own property, I could turn their game right back on them. The next morning, I walked the perimeter of my lot, a surveyor's map in hand. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the lake sparkled under the early sun. I found the markers, small, weathered stakes half buried in the soil, confirming what I'd suspected. The HOA's precious community path that wound along the lakefront, it cut right through my property. Every jogger, every dog walker, every nosy neighbor who strolled that path was trespassing. On my land. I smiled for the first time since that letter arrived. If they wanted to play dirty, I'd play dirtier. I spent the day drafting my own notice, my fingers flying across the keyboard. Notice of trespass violation. It read, addressed to the HOA board. I cited the property lines, the bylaws they loved so much, and demanded $5,000 for every instance of unauthorized access. By my count, that path saw dozens of people a day. The math was on my side. The HOA president, Margaret Hensley, lived in a pristine colonial at the end of the street. She was the kind of woman who wore pearls to a neighborhood picnic and spoke in a tone that made you feel like you were already in trouble. I hand-delivered my notice to her doorstep, slipping it into her mailbox with a satisfying thud. The lake was calm that evening, but I could feel the storm brewing. Margaret wasn't going to take this lying down, and neither was I. The next day, I got a call from her. Her voice was sharp, like a knife wrapped in velvet. Clara, this is ridiculous. You can't fine the entire neighborhood for walking a public path. Public? I almost laughed. It's not public, Margaret, I said, keeping my voice steady. It's mine. Check the deed. There was a long pause, and I could practically hear her fuming through the phone. This isn't over, she snapped before hanging up. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the lake. Oh, it was far from over. The neighborhood buzzed with gossip over the next few days. I caught whispers at the mailbox, sidelong glances from neighbors I barely knew. Some thought I was crazy. Others, mostly the ones who'd also been stung by the HOA's rules, gave me quiet nods of approval. I wasn't alone in my frustration. There was Tom, the retired mechanic who'd been fined for parking his truck in his own driveway, and Sarah, the single mom who'd gotten a warning for her son's basketball hoop. We were all tired of the HOA's iron fist, but I was the first to swing back. By the end of the week, I got another letter. This one wasn't a fine. It was a summons to an emergency HOA meeting to address my disruptive behavior. They wanted to put me on trial in front of the whole neighborhood. Fine, let them. I've been preparing for this fight my whole life. The meeting was held in the community center, a sterile room with fluorescent lights and folding chairs. I walked in, head high, my surveyor's map and deed tucked under my arm. The room was packed. Neighbors I'd never spoken to, board members with their clipboards, and Margaret, sitting at the front like a queen on her throne. The air was thick with tension, every eye on me as I took my seat. Margaret stood, her pearls gleaming under the lights, and launched into a speech about community values and respecting shared spaces. She called my trespassing fine absurd and divisive, her words dripping with condescension. I let her talk, let her think she had the upper hand. Then it was my turn. I stood, holding up the map, and laid out the truth. The path was on my land. The HOA had no right to fine me for swimming in my lake, and I had every right to fine them for trespassing. The room erupted in murmurs, some shocked, some angry, a few quietly cheering. Then came the twist I hadn't seen coming. Margaret's face softened, and she played a card I didn't expect. "Clara," she said, her voice suddenly gentle, "we know you've been through a lot. Losing your husband last year, we understand this might be about more than just the lake." My breath caught. The room went silent. My husband, David, had died in a car accident 18 months ago. It was a wound I carried quietly, one I didn't share with strangers, let alone this crowd. How did she know? And why was she bringing it up now? I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, a mix of anger and embarrassment. She was trying to paint me as unhinged, a grieving widow lashing out. It was a low blow, and it hurt more than I'd admit, but also lit a fire in me. I wasn't going to let her use my pain against me. I straightened, my voice steady. "This isn't about my loss, Margaret. This is about what's right. And what's right is that this is my land, my lake, and my life. You don't get to control it." The room stayed quiet for a moment, the weight of my words hanging in the air. I could see the cracks forming in Margaret's composure, her lips pressed into a thin line. She hadn't expected me to push back so hard, to turn her attempt at pity into fuel for my fight. The neighbors shifted in their seats, some leaning forward, others whispering to each other. I felt the tide turning, but I knew this was only the beginning. Margaret recovered quickly, her voice sharp again. "This is about community, Clara. You're tearing us apart over a technicality." A technicality? I wanted to laugh. My land wasn't a technicality. It was mine, paid for with years of savings, a dream David and I had built together. But I didn't say that. I didn't need to. The map in my hand spoke louder than any sob story. I sat down, my heart pounding, but my resolve stronger than ever. The meeting dragged on, with other board members chiming in, citing rules and precedents I'd already debunked in my head. They were scrambling, and I could see it. When it was over, no decision had been made, but I'd planted a seed. People were questioning the HOA's authority, maybe for the first time. As I walked out, Tom caught up with me in the parking lot. "You really stirred the hornet's nest," he said, a grin tugging at his weathered face. "About time someone did." I smiled back, but inside, I was bracing for what came next. Margaret wasn't going to let this go, and I needed to be ready. The next week was a blur of preparation. I hired a lawyer, a sharp woman named Rachel who specialized in property disputes. She reviewed my deed, the surveyor's map, and the HOA bylaws, her eyes lighting up as she read. "They've overstepped," she said, tapping the map. "The path is clearly on your property, and they've been using it without an easement. You've got a solid case. Solid, but not airtight. The HOA had deep pockets and a reputation for dragging things out. Rachel warned me they might try to bury me in legal fees, but I wasn't backing down. I'd already lost too much to let them take this, too. David and I had dreamed of this lakefront life, nights by the water, mornings with coffee on the dock. I wasn't going to let a group of busybodies steal that from me. By the weekend, the neighborhood was a powder keg. Someone had leaked my trespassing notice to the local paper, and suddenly, Harmony Oaks was the talk of the town. The headline read, Lakefront resident fights back against HOA overreach. I didn't ask for the attention, but I wasn't complaining. It put pressure on the board, and I could feel their grips slipping. Neighbors started reaching out, some with support, others with their own HOA horror stories. There was the couple who'd been fined for planting a vegetable garden, the artist who'd gotten a warning for a non-conforming mailbox. The more I heard, the more I realized this wasn't just my fight. It was ours. Then came the second twist, the one that nearly broke me. I was out by the lake one evening, checking the property markers again, when I saw it, a new sign hammered into the ground just beyond my land. Private property, HOA access only, it read. My stomach dropped. They weren't just fighting me. They were claiming the lake itself. I called Rachel immediately, and she confirmed my worst fear. The HOA was trying to file a claim of adverse possession, arguing they'd been maintaining the lakefront for years and could legally take it. It was a desperate move, but a dangerous one. If they succeeded, I'd lose not just the path, but part of the lake itself. The thought made my chest tighten. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about everything I had left. I spent that night poring over old records, emails, anything that could prove the HOA had no legitimate claim. David had always been the organized one, keeping files on everything. I found a folder in his old desk labeled Lake Property, stuffed with receipts, permits, and correspondence with the previous owner. One document caught my eye, a letter from the county dated 10 years ago, confirming the property lines and denying the HOA's request for an easement. They'd known all along the path was mine, and they'd used it anyway. My hand shook as I read it. This was the smoking gun I needed, but it also meant they'd been lying to the entire neighborhood for years. The next morning, I met Rachel at her office, the letter in hand. She read it, her expression shifting from surprise to determination. "This changes everything," she said. "They can't claim adverse possession if they knew the land wasn't theirs. We need to take this to court." Court. The word felt heavy, final. I'd never been one for lawsuits, but I was in too deep to turn back. I nodded, and we started planning. The HOA wasn't just fighting me now. They were fighting the truth, and I was going to make sure it came out. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined, with dark wood paneling and a faint smell of polish. I sat at the plaintiff's table, Rachel beside me, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. Across the room, Margaret and the HOA's lawyer, a slick man named Gordon, whispered to each other. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes, called the room to order. My heart pounded as Rachel presented our case, laying out the property lines, the bylaws, and the county letter that proved the HOA's overreach. Gordon countered with a smooth argument about community benefit and long-standing use, but I could see the judge wasn't buying it. She kept glancing at the letter, her brow furrowed. When it was my turn to speak, I stood, my voice steadier than I felt. "This isn't just about a path or a lake," I said. "It's about what's right. I bought this land for a dream, and they're trying to take it from me. I won't let them." The room was silent as I sat down. Even Margaret looked unsettled, her usual composure fraying at the edges. The judge asked a few pointed questions, her tone cutting through Gordon's rehearsed answers. Then she called a recess, and we waited. Rachel squeezed my hand, whispering, "You did great." But I couldn't relax. Not yet. Outside, a small crowd had gathered, neighbors, reporters, even a few curious locals. The story had spread beyond Harmony Oaks, turning our little dispute into a symbol of something bigger. People were tired of HOAs, of rules that stifled freedom, of boards that acted like kings. I wasn't just fighting for my lake anymore. I was fighting for all of them. When the judge returned, her ruling was swift. The HOA's claim of adverse possession was denied. The path was mine, and so was the lakefront. The fines they'd issued were void, and they were ordered to remove their sign and pay my legal fees. I felt a rush of relief, but it was short-lived. Margaret stood, her face red, and demanded a board vote to appeal. The room gasped. She wasn't giving up, even now. Rachel leaned over, her voice low. "They can appeal, but they won't win. We've got the evidence." I nodded, but my stomach twisted. This wasn't the end. It was another battle line drawn. The fallout was immediate. The HOA board held an emergency meeting the next day, and I wasn't invited. I didn't care. I was done playing by their rules. I spent the day reinforcing my property line, installing new markers and a small fence to make it clear where my land began. Neighbors stopped by, some to congratulate me, others to complain about the path being closed. I listened, but I didn't budge. This was my home, my boundary, my right. By evening, Tom and Sarah showed up with a bottle of wine and a plan. "We're starting a petition," Tom said, his eyes gleaming, "to reform the HOA, new board, new rules. You in?" I hesitated. I never wanted to be a leader, just to be left alone. But I saw the hope in their faces, the same hope I'd felt when I first fought back. I nodded. "I'm in." The petition spread like wildfire. Within days, we had dozens of signatures, then hundreds. People were fed up, and my fight had given them a voice. The HOA tried to push back, sending out letters about maintaining community standards, but it only fueled the fire. At the next meeting, the room was packed again, but this time, it wasn't just about me. Neighbors stood up, one by one, sharing their stories. Fines for trivial things, threats for non-compliance, a board that cared more about power than people. Margaret tried to regain control, her voice shrill, but the crowd wasn't listening. They wanted change, and they wanted it now. Then came another blow, one I should have seen coming. Late one night, I found a new notice taped to my door. The HOA was proposing a new bylaw. All lakefront properties would be subject to shared access for the community, effectively stripping me of control over my land. It was a last-ditch effort to undermine my victory, and it was personal. I called Rachel, my voice shaking with anger. "Can they do this?" I asked. She sighed. "They can try, but it needs a majority vote. And after everything, I don't think they'll get it." I wasn't so sure. Margaret was cunning, and she knew how to sway people. I needed to act fast. I spent the next day rallying support, knocking on doors, talking to neighbors I'd barely spoken to before. Some were hesitant, worried about rocking the boat, but others were ready to fight. Sarah organized a meeting at her house, and we brainstormed ways to stop the bylaw. Tom suggested going public again, maybe a press conference. I wasn't sure I was ready for that, but I knew we couldn't stay quiet. The HOA was counting on us to back down, to let them rewrite the rules. I wasn't going to let that happen. Not to me, not to anyone. The press conference was held on my front lawn, the lake sparkling behind us like a quiet ally. A local reporter, a young woman named Emily, had been following the story and jumped at the chance to cover it. I stood with Tom, Sarah, and a handful of other neighbors, our petition in hand, as cameras flashed and microphones hovered. I spoke first, my voice carrying over the crowd. "This isn't just about my land," I said. "It's about all of us, about our homes, our rights, our freedom to live without someone telling us how to plant our gardens or park our cars. The HOA is trying to take that from us, and we're here to say no." The crowd cheered, louder than I'd expected. I saw Margaret watching from across the street, her arms crossed, her face a mask of fury. The story went viral. By the next morning, it was on every local news outlet and even picked up by a few national ones. Lakefront Rebellion, one woman's fight against HOA tyranny, one headline read. I didn't feel like a rebel, just a woman who wanted to swim in her own lake. But the attention was working. More neighbors signed the petition, and the HOA support was crumbling. At the next board meeting, the room was electric with tension. Margaret tried to push the new bylaw, but the crowd wasn't having it. One by one, people stood up, demanding accountability, transparency, a new board. When a vote came, the bylaw was shot down, 68 to 12. Margaret's face went pale. For the first time, she looked small. But victory came at a cost. The HOA didn't go quietly. They sent out a flurry of new fines, targeting anyone who'd spoken out. Tom got hit for his truck again. Sarah got a notice for her son's bike left in the yard. Even Emily, the reporter, got a warning for unauthorized filming on community property. It was retaliation, plain and simple, and it made my blood boil. I called Rachel, who was already drafting a class action lawsuit. "This is bigger than just you now," she said. "We can take them down for good." I wasn't sure I wanted to be the face of a movement, but I didn't have a choice. The fight had found me, and I wasn't going to run. The lawsuit was filed a week later, representing over 30 neighbors. We accused the HOA of harassment, overreach, and violating state property laws. The local paper called it the Battle for Harmony Oaks, and they weren't wrong. The board tried to spin it, sending out letters about preserving community values, but no one was listening anymore. Margaret stepped down as president, citing personal reasons, but we all knew the truth. She'd lost control, and the board was fracturing. A new election was called, and Tom and Sarah both ran, promising fairness and transparency. I didn't run. I wasn't a leader, just a fighter, but I campaigned for them, knocking on doors, sharing our story. The election was a landslide. Tom and Sarah won, along with 2 other neighbors who'd been vocal in the fight. The new board's first act was to repeal the most oppressive bylaws, including the lake access rule. They also issued an apology to me, publicly acknowledging the overreach. I didn't need their apology, but it felt good to hear. The fines stopped, the notices disappeared, and the neighborhood started to feel like a community again. I walked down to the lake that evening, the water calm and silver under the moonlight. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. But there was one last surprise waiting. A week after the election, I found an envelope in my mailbox, no return address. Inside was a handwritten note from Margaret. "Clara," it read, "I underestimated you. I thought I was protecting our community, but I see now I was wrong. I'm leaving Harmony Oaks. Maybe it's time for a fresh start for all of us." I stood there stunned. Margaret, the woman who'd made my life hell, was gone. I didn't know whether to feel triumph or pity. Maybe both. I folded the note and tucked it away, a reminder that even the fiercest battles could end in unexpected ways. The lake was mine again, but it was more than that. It was a symbol of what I'd fought for, not just my land, but my right to live on my terms. I started swimming every morning, the water cool and welcoming, each stroke a reminder of what I'd won. Neighbors joined me sometimes, not on the path, but on my dock with my permission. We'd laugh, share stories, build something new. The HOA wasn't gone, but it was different now. Smaller, fairer, a tool for the community, not a weapon against it. The seasons changed, and Harmony Oaks began to heal. The new board met regularly, but the meetings were open, relaxed, more like town halls than tribunals. Tom and Sarah were true to their word, focusing on practical things, fixing potholes, organizing a neighborhood cleanup, even planning a lakefront picnic where everyone was welcome. I helped with the picnic, setting up tables by the water, watching kids run along the shore, their laughter echoing across the lake. It felt like the place David and I had dreamed of, the kind of community we'd wanted to be part of. I still missed him every day, but the pain was softer now, woven into the life I was building. The lawsuit wrapped up a few months later. The court ruled in our favor, ordering the old HOA board to pay damages to every plaintiff. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to cover legal fees and send a message. No one was above the law, not even an HOA. The story spread beyond our town, inspiring other neighborhoods to push back against overzealous boards. I got letters from strangers, people I'd never met, thanking me for showing them they could fight too. I didn't feel like a hero, but I was proud of what we'd done, proud of what we'd changed. One evening, as I sat on my dock, the lake reflecting a sky full of stars, Sarah stopped by. She handed me a coffee and sat beside me, her feet dangling over the water. "You know," she said, "none of this would have happened without you. You started it all." I shook my head. I just wanted to swim in my lake. She laughed, and we sat there in comfortable silence, the water lapping at the dock. For the first time, I felt like I belonged here, not just on my land, but in this community we were rebuilding together. The fight had changed me, too. I'd always been stubborn, but now I saw that stubbornness as strength. I learned to stand up, not just for myself, but for others, to question rules that didn't make sense, to fight for what was right. The lake was my home, but it was also a reminder. Freedom isn't given, it's taken. And sometimes it's worth every battle, every fine, every sleepless night. I still swim every morning, the water a quiet companion. Sometimes I think of David, of the dreams we shared, and I feel him there in the ripple of the waves, in the warmth of the sun. I think of Margaret, too, and wonder where she ended up. I hope she found her own peace, her own fresh start. But mostly, I think of the future, of the neighborhood we're building, of the fights we'll face, of the life I'm living now on my terms. The lake is mine, but it's more than that. It's a promise kept, a victory won, a story told. Looking back, the fight with the HO, it wasn't just about a fine or a path. It was about reclaiming something deeper. It was about standing up when every instinct told you to sit down, about finding your voice when silence seemed easier. Harmony Oaks wasn't perfect, but it was better. The new board prioritized people over rules, and the neighborhood felt alive again. Kids played in front yards without fear of fines. Gardens bloomed in colors the old HOA would have banned. And the lake? It was everyone's now, in a way, not because they owned it, but because I chose to share it. I'd invite neighbors over for barbecues, let kids fish off my dock. It wasn't about control anymore. It was about connection. The legal victory had ripple effects. Other HOAs in the county started reforming, scared of their own Clara Evans moment. Rachel, my lawyer, took on more cases, becoming a local legend for taking down overreaching boards. She called me sometimes, laughing about how my case had sparked a movement. "You're a troublemaker, Clara," she'd say, but I could hear the pride in her voice. I didn't set out to start a revolution, but I was glad to be part of one. The letters from strangers kept coming, each one a reminder that one person's fight could inspire others. I'd read them on my porch, the lake stretching out before me, and feel a quiet strength. There were still challenges. Some neighbors held grudges, loyal to the old board or just wary of change. A few tried to stir up trouble, complaining about the new board's leniency or my role in it all. I let them talk. I'd learned that not everyone would understand, and that was okay. What mattered was the majority, the ones who showed up, who signed the petition, who stood with me. Tom and Sarah were tireless, organizing community events, listening to complaints, making sure no one felt ignored. I helped where I could, but mostly I focused on living, on swimming, on healing. One morning, as I floated in the lake, the water cool against my skin, I thought about how far I'd come. The fine that started it all felt like a lifetime ago. I'd been angry then, raw with grief and frustration, but that anger had carried me through. It had shown me what I was capable of. I wasn't just Clara, the widow who moved to the lake. I was Clara, the woman who fought and won. The woman who changed things. The woman who wasn't afraid to stand alone, even when it hurt. The lake was my constant through all. It held my memories of David, my battles with the HO, and my quiet moments of triumph. I'd swim out to the middle sometimes, where the water was deep and still, and let myself float, weightless. It was my place to think, to feel, to be. The neighborhood had changed, but so had I. I'd found something in this fight, not just my land, but myself. And that was worth more than any fine, any lawsuit, any victory. A year later, Harmony Oaks was unrecognizable in the best way. The community picnic had become an annual tradition, with tables stretched along the lakefront, music playing, and neighbors laughing like old friends. I stood by my dock, watching kids chase each other through the grass, their parents sharing stories over plates of barbecue. Tom was grilling, his apron stained with sauce, while Sarah handed out lemonade to anyone who passed by. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever is, but it was ours. A place where rules serve people, not the other way around. I still got the occasional letter from someone inspired by our story, and I'd reply when I could, encouraging them to stand up, to fight for what was theirs. Rachel had started a nonprofit to help homeowners navigate HOA disputes, and I'd chip in with advice or a quick speech at her events. It felt good to give back, to know my fight had meant something beyond my own backyard. But mostly I just lived. I swam every morning, tended my garden, invited neighbors over for coffee. The lake was my anchor, my reminder of what I'd fought for and why. Sometimes, I find myself thinking about Margaret. Her note had stayed with me, a quiet admission of defeat and maybe, just maybe, a hint of respect. I didn't hate her. She'd been wrong, but she'd been human, caught up in her own version of right and wrong. I hope she found peace wherever she was. As for me, I'd found mine, not just in the lake, but in the life I'd built, the community I'd helped shape, the strength I'd discovered within myself. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the lake in shades of orange and pink, I sat on my dock with a glass of wine. The air was warm, the water still, and for a moment everything felt right. I thought of David, of the dreams we'd shared, and I smiled. He'd have loved this, loved the fight, loved the victory, loved the way I'd turned our dream into something real. I raised my glass to the lake, to him, to me. We did it, I whispered, and we had.